This is IAQ Radio, Indoor Air Quality Radio, the voice of the indoor air quality industry, with your host, Radio Joe Hughes, and the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. And now, Radio Joe Hughes.
Hey, and welcome to IAQ Radio. We're going to have our final coverage today, our hurricane coverage. We're going to do the finale. We've got Dr. Ralph Moon calling in from Tampa. Actually, he's on the computer. And we're going to have Michael Bowdoin, attorney from Houston, Texas. So we're going to wrap it up here and move on to 2018. But before we get started, let's thank our marquee sponsors.
IAQ Radio marquee sponsors are John Don Products, where restoration and abatement contractors shop. Visit them at johndon.com. That's JONDON.com. Healthy Indoor Magazine, a free online digital magazine for industry professionals and consumers. Subscriptions are available at IAQ.net. Particles Plus, engineers and manufacturers, feature rich particle counters, air quality monitoring, instrumentation, and vacuum pump technology. ParticlesPlus.com. Count on us. And now you can win a cool prize. It's time for the IAQ Radio Trivia Question. Be the first to correctly answer. Simply email your answer to czlotnick@cs.com. Or if listening live, just text your answer from your computer. And now, here's the Z-Man with this week's IAQ Radio Trivia Question.
Hello, everyone, and congratulations to IAQ Susan Valenti, IAQ Media Group, LLC in Andover, Massachusetts, for being the first person to identify August 17, 2006 as the date of the first broadcast of IAQ Radio. The IAQ Radio Trivia Question for today, February 16, 2018, has been sponsored by Ideas, a solution chemistry company, creating unique solutions to odor removal, surface cleaning, and decontamination problems. Here is today's trivia question. Name the intensity rating on which hurricanes are rated. Back to you, Joe.
Okay, so we've got Ralph Moon. Dr. Moon manages the building science department at Ph.D. Services in Tampa, Florida. He's a building scientist with more than 34 years of consulting experience in the areas of duration of loss, risk assessment, project management, industrial hygiene, and indoor air quality assessment. He has published over 100 peer-reviewed articles and papers and is a frequent expert witness on insurance-related claims and projects. He's just back from Miami yesterday, actually, doing some more expert witness work. He has a unique background that combines his extensive field experience, seminar development, research, and legal services in an IAQ, building science, and disaster restoration. We've also got Mike Bowdoin, an attorney in Kingwood, Texas, with a long career in construction law and a lot of work in indoor environments with indoor environmental professionals and restoration contractors. He's currently a vice president of the board of directors of the Indoor Air Quality Association, and he had extensive experience working on standards through the Institute for Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration certification, and was a big contributor to the S520 standard, and I think maybe S500 as well. Gentlemen, let's make sure we've got you on the line.
We're here. Thanks, Joe.
Hello, Ralph. Mike?
This is Michael. Thank you, Joe. Yes, sir.
Great to have you. All right, let's get started. First, I want to get a little idea of your perspective. Let's start with Ralph on the recovery. Starting with Florida, I guess. And Ralph, I don't know if you get down into the Virgin Islands or Puerto Rico at all, but if you could update listeners on where we're at and
Sure.
how things are coming along.
So our work in Puerto Rico and the other islands is pretty limited. We do have selected projects, but this year, the total volume of work from that area was pretty underwhelming. We had invitations, and here was the problem. The first question was, could we get down there by an aircraft? Was there a place to stay? The area where we're supposed to investigate typically was commercial buildings. Do they have power and water? And were they physically there? And so if we could overcome those four, that was one element. We didn't. Many times the client would arrange the claim. We would go down and they say, cancel. We're just not going to cover that loss because it's gone or it's flooded out. The other challenge was just the safety factor. And the company has a pretty conservative viewpoint about that. And in the end, we didn't do anything in Puerto Rico or the islands.
So how are things coming along in Florida?
This year, if we look back at 2004, 5, 6, and 7 compared to this season, it was modest. Normally, we would have literally thousands of claims coming in after a hurricane loss. This year, it's in the hundreds, maybe 400, 500, 600. But we had a lot less. And it seems as though the insurance providers were just being much more rapid in their response to their policyholders. And rather than bringing in a consultant to evaluate the loss, they were just as rapidly as possible trying to provide a check and give them some help.
Interesting. Mike, how about Texas? How are things coming along in Texas? You guys had a more widespread damage.
We did. August the 24th through the 30th, we experienced Hurricane Harvey, and we'll go over the numbers a little later in the broadcast, but we got as much rain in those 4, 5, 6 days as we do all year, almost 50 inches. So it caused widespread destruction throughout South Texas. I live in Harris County, and it was just a massive mess. I have never seen anything. I've been there for 61 years. I was born and raised in Houston. My mother still lives in the house that my father built in 1958, and she had 3 feet of water in her house. Never had a drop in almost 60 years. So it was massive. I will talk about a little bit later all the numbers, but I read somewhere it was a 40,000 year flood event.
Wow. And how has that affected your workload, Mike? Have you had an increased workload with IEPs or with restoration contractors that have had issues as a result of insurance coverage or just, any number of other items?
Well, what happened in Hurricane Harvey was most of the work was done by the homeowners because there was over 100,000 structures affected in Harris County alone, much less all the surrounding counties. So most of the work was done by volunteers. Many of the churches, some of the real estate companies like Keller Williams Realty sent in teams from all over the country. And when you have that massive of a volunteer effort, many of the remediators were just so overwhelmed that a lot of the professional services just couldn't get connected up with the people that needed them. And so what's happening now is we're slowly rebuilding. There is a shortage of skilled labor. The cost increases have gone up by 30%, and we're just struggling to get along. So there's not been a lot of legal work generated as yet.
I'm wondering if I'll throw this out for either of you, because there was such widespread damage all through the Southeast. I'm assuming some of it wasn't responded to as quickly as we would like in a typical situation. Are you guys seeing more of a mold rush? I guess more mold type claims coming in now, 3, 4, 5 months later.
I'll go first, Mike, if you don't mind. No, and that surprised us. The predominant claim that's coming in the Keys is flooding and structural damage. In the rest of the area north, it's roof damage. Roof claims are coming in by the hundreds per week. And so like last week, we had like 400 or 500 come in. So we're scrambling to do roof damage, but we're not really doing much mold work. I think that may come later, but we were hoping it would come in January, but right now it's mostly structural work.
Interesting. Mike?
I have to echo Ralph's assertion. We're not seeing any mold claims really start deluging yet. What we're seeing, because of the fact that it was probably more of a massive flood water event than it was a windstorm, hail. The water came and left. It stayed in some areas as little as a few hours, and those homes were not the mold claims aren't going to be generated out of those homes. There was a portion of West Houston where the water stayed for as much as 11 days. So I'm anticipating more mold claims, but right now what we're seeing is surface water flooding, very limited roof damage. But you have to also look at it in this context. And most of the places in flooded in Houston were not in flood prone areas. So very few people had flood insurance. So they're relying on FEMA and other sources to rebuild.
Yeah. I think one of the twists that'll happen in the future is, as Mike said, a lot of homeowners took the initiative and tore out the lower probably 4 feet of gypsum in their home, that not only taking out the mass of water, but also any microbial growth. But the other interesting thing is that I think will emerge is there'll be complaints once the home gets back into good shape. They'll complain of HVAC and ductwork problems with mold growth and debris that may be distributed throughout the air conditioning system. So that's probably something that'll be on the horizon, is HVAC related problems.
Okay, that's a great point, Ralph. Cliff, I want to make sure I give you a chance to jump in here. Any follow-ups?
No, I'm good, Joe.
All right, we've heard tales of restoration contractors, particularly in Florida, kind of deliberately minimizing their emergency response to allow things to escalate, and then consider everything a category 3 and gut the area. I'm wondering, Ralph, if you've run into any of that. I know you do a lot of work with the insurance companies. Is that a complaint you've been getting, or is that something that maybe was more localized to the people that were telling us?
I'll have to tell you, Joe, I have never heard that. If anything, the contractors that come initially, the mitigation contractors that dry, maybe there's been some accusations of being too thorough, but never have there been, I heard of someone doing an incomplete job, except for maybe a rare occasion. So I'd say no to that one.
What about categorization of the water? Have there been many disagreements with respect to, is this category 1, 2, or 3 in your experience, Ralph?
Interesting. I had a deposition last week, and there was no consideration whatsoever about the category of water that was being discharged from a kitchen sink into a cabinet until the deposition. And the opposing counsel said that this was category 3 water. And I said, what are you doing at the sink that you would have category 3? But sometimes there's a strategy to kind of shake things up in the course of an investigation for opposing counsel to propose that this moisture that may have been introduced either by a flood or by a roof or by a sink, depends upon the combination, could be more severe than you thought. And that's the first time that's happened to me. But with regard to this circumstance, the flooding circumstance that Mike experienced, we had in the Keys, is typically category 2. And we recognize too that roof penetrations, although they may originate from rainfall, can advance to category 2 with time, depending upon what it encounters. But I've never heard of a 2 going to a 3. So that's my experience.
Okay. And guys, I want to continue along the insurance line a little bit and throw this out. Insurance issues have become more of an issue, obviously, since the hurricanes. You get this flood of insurance claims, and of course the insurance companies are going to be looking closely at things, and they're going to look at how well their policies worked after the large loss like this, especially when you've got more than one in several different areas. What kind of changes do you think we can expect from the insurance industry, if any, after their experience with these recent hurricanes? Let's start with Mike.
Well, what happened in Houston was many areas of town flooded that had never flooded before, weren't even close to a flood-prone area. Therefore, many people, and very few people, had flood insurance. So what has happened, what we anticipate happening in the insurance industry is, because the damage was we had $190 billion of damage just in Harris County. With all of those claims and all of those insurance payouts, there is expected to be a surcharge levied against homeowners insurance throughout the state of Texas, especially in the southern part of the state. So even if you had flood insurance or didn't have flood insurance, you will see an increase in rates as the industry struggles to recover some of those damages.
That's interesting, Mike. Will they have to take that proposed hike to like the insurance commission, or will they be able to just ram that through somehow?
I think they're going to have to go through the insurance commission in the state of Texas, but I'm not an expert on legislative matters before the State Board of Insurance. But I can tell you one thing. A lot of money was paid out, and they're going to have to recover that some way.
Interesting. So people who are not in a flood area may still end up helping to pay for those who decide to build in flood zones. Ralph, I wonder if you have any thoughts on possible changes in the future with respect to insurance.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm not representing the insurance industry today. I mean, none of us on the panel are representing the insurance industry, but I do have some observations that are, I think, reasonable. And that is, I think that as far as anything new, I can't really conceive of something new, but rather that the insurance companies, as in the past, will try to enforce the basic provisions of their policy. I mean, the policy consists of certain provisions. I kind of term them as promises. And if they promise to provide certain coverage, they expect that the homeowner will provide certain promises to be forthcoming in describing the extent of damage. That has been a problem recently, not just with hurricanes, just with policies in general, where the homeowner has a loss, and there seems to be some reluctance to follow the duty within 60 days to describe the damages informally, either in a recorded message or in a description of the damage. And I think that's usually the first step. And that's the first step that the insurance company asks for. Say, hey, within 30 days, give us a letter or respond to our letters that describe the extent of damage. And that's the part that seems to be somewhat confounding in a lot of for a lot of insurance companies, is trying to get promptness from the homeowner to be definitive about what was damaged. So I think they'll just still fight for that, use the language to say, hey, you didn't do it or you did do it. And then in the end, it ends up with a judge and jury. And from their perspective, they would hope they'd be persuasive. And often from the homeowner's perspective, they try to leverage the circumstances of the loss and the difficulties they went through to maybe get the sympathy of the jury.
Ralph, what would you recommend for a homeowner to, obviously they should try and document the damages as quickly as possible, but is there anything else that you'd recommend they do to help them with respect to making sure this doesn't come back to bite them?
Well, keep in mind, I'm coming from a very isolated position. I'm not in the boardroom of insurance companies. I'm not at the executive table talking about philosophies or strategies. But my observations and things listening to homeowner or to adjusters is simply this: just be truthful. Just tell the truth. Come forth. Don't complicate the relationship with efforts to sue somebody, because that usually just slams the door on the relationship. Is be forthright. I think that for most adjusters I've known, is they want to find coverage if they can. They want to help out. They want to be complete, get it off their desk, and move on to the next one, because there's about 200 more on their desk. So they just are looking for a cooperative relationship, and if you provide that, it can sometimes be effective.
Okay, Mike, anything you'd like to add there?
Sure. I found that the insurance companies, especially in my mother's case, the flood insurance carrier, were extremely responsive. They were very sympathetic. They showed up when they were supposed to show up. They were very thorough and efficient in their examination of the structure and the contents. It was extremely. I think it's extremely well documented how much. And you can also go to certain websites in Harris County and get how much water was in each area of town, and so they're cognizant of the fact that there was a lot of water, and it was in some places it was there for a long period of time. So I think the insurance companies, in my estimation, are doing a great job right now. I think it has been it was such an incredible event that. The professionals, the remediators and the restorers and the inspectors could not get to all 136,000 homes fast enough to make this a manageable disaster. So I think the insurance companies, in my estimation, have been doing a great job.
Mm-hmm. And let me add to that. I had a chance to do a presentation with another attorney about depositions, and it was right during the hurricane response time. And before the presentation, I was asking some adjusters how things were going, and they had described that since the hurricane came, they were trying to get this all done in 90 days. This particular insurer was about 99% completed with all the policies that had submitted claims in that period. But they were working 16-hour days. They were working 7 days a week. They had cots set up for the employees to sleep at the offices so they could be more consistent. But I think that the vast majority it was like all hands on deck, trying to be responsive and quick as possible, literally living at the office, eating cold pizza and sodas, getting it through and getting done. So I was pretty impressed. And as I said, in this particular instance, they're about 99% completed with all policies that had submitted claims.
Very interesting.
And that was my experience. That was my experience as well. The adjuster that handled my mother's house had several thousand claims and was coming in from, I don't remember where he was from, the Midwest somewhere, but they were doing a yeoman's job.
Cliff, I want to let you jump in here. Any quick follow-ups?
Yeah, I just wondered, particularly Mike, if you're seeing anything like this in Texas. You know, one of the unique things that happened at the MGM fire was they had an insufficient amount of insurance, and the insurance company ended up selling the MGM after the fire an insurance policy, and they then paid for the loss. And over a number of years, MGM paid them back. I wondered whether there are any creative solutions like that in Texas between government and the insurance industry in trying to help the people that need it.
I think we're too early in the process to get that complex, but I do think that the sheer amount of damage paid out over a short period of time is going to require the creative solutions, whether there's co-insurance involved, multiple levels of coverage, whether the federal government gets involved, or whether the state and local municipalities. There's a lot of money flowing into Houston right now, and I do to aid in the reconstruction. So I do think that there's going to be some creative solutions worked out, but I haven't seen those in action as yet.
Thank you.
I wonder, are either one of you familiar with any insurance companies that look like they're going to have financial, issues and maybe would even go belly up as the result of all these damages they're paying out?
I certainly am not familiar with, that's not come to mind just yet. That, again, as kind of Mike said, we'll see what evolves. But there were a number of years without hurricanes, so we hope that helped to lend stability. The only challenges were some of the majority of policies in the area struck by the hurricane, and that's always a risk. But nonetheless, if they were balanced in their geographic distribution, which is tough to do in Florida because the hurricane affected the whole state. But nonetheless, it's a function of balance of policies and their fiscal strength. And we don't know that yet.
Plus reinsurance.
Ralph is absolutely correct. These excess carriers, especially from the larger carriers, have the geographic distribution is so well managed that one hit in a specific area of the country is not going to necessarily affect the overall well-being of the company, but it's got to hurt. It's got to hurt, and those dollars have to come from somewhere, whether they're shareholders or government assistance. But the excess carriers that I've been in touch with are pretty well geographically distributed.
Cliff, did you want to jump in?
No, I just wanted to mention, too, that a lot of insurance companies, for insurance purposes, buy reinsurance. They actually are insured by other insurance companies, and I suspect that may come into play as well.
Sure.
I'm wondering, you both seem to feel that the insurance companies have done a pretty good job, and they've been responding well, and they've been covering what was supposed to be covered, essentially. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you seem to think they're doing a pretty good job. I'm wondering if what your thoughts are on the use of maybe a public adjuster for people that feel like they're not getting that kind of response. Any thoughts on the use of public adjusters in these types of situations after hurricanes?
I haven't heard anything about any pros and cons. I believe there is a place in every industry for professionals. The public adjusters I've dealt with over the years are very professional and have, I believe, the client's needs in mind. I will say that I do believe that there's going to be probably more public adjusters involved in this particular disaster than have done in the past, because of the fact that very few people had insurance coverage for this peril. So I think that these homeowners who either in conjunction with volunteer organizations did their own remediation and drying, I believe they're going to be looking for help as they start to rebuild, and as the FEMA limits, I believe, are low. And so they're going to be looking for professional help in other areas to try to, get back on their feet again. I do believe there's probably going to be more public adjusters here than have been before. And it's a well-regulated industry, and I think there's a great need for those individuals, and I'm looking forward to working with them.
Ralph, any comments?
Well, I've had a chance to work with a wide variety of public adjusters. Some I think are very, very professional. I've enjoyed their company and their friendship. And then others who are very, very aggressive and tend to submit highly inflated invoices or estimates for repair of damages. And I've found that that process of the public adjuster with the assignment of benefits, the submittal of huge invoices, greatly complicates the speed at which the homeowner can be made whole. And I think as I've heard at other RIA, Restoration Industry Association meetings, it's all about the policy holder. And so when the process gets complicated and slowed down because of personal interests and not focused upon the homeowner, I think we have to think about that. And again, so there's a wide variety of people who engage in that. Obviously, there's been a niche created because there was a need. But nonetheless, overall, I find it more of a complication than a benefit.
All right. Fair enough, gentlemen. I think, Cliff, it's probably because you've got a special announcement here. We're going to probably break just a little early for halftime. Does that sound good to you?
Good, Joe. Fine. Hello, everyone. I'm sad to report the passing of William Lakin, certified restorer. Bill was the 2005 RIA president and 2001 recipient of the Martin L. King Award. Bill passed away in his hometown of Staffordshire, England on January 8th of this year, and funeral services were held by the family on January 19th at the Stafford Crematorium in the United Kingdom. Bill is survived by his wife, Sue Lakin, a frequent companion of his on Bill's trips to the United States over the past 3 decades. During the early stages of Bill's career, he was active in the United Kingdom's local cleaning industry association and was also the longest-serving president of the National Carpet Cleaners Association, serving 7 years. In the 1980s, Bill was an explorer, a seeker of knowledge, and part of the early wave of Brits who joined RIA looking to network with U.S. and Canadian restorers and for advanced education in the restoration arts and sciences offered through RIA's National Institute of Fire Restoration Division. Bill endeared himself to his fellow North American RIA members and became the association's favorite English son and a mainstay of RIA seminars and events. Bill was a great student and early adopter, taking home what he learned in the States to help better educate England's cleaners and restorers on the nuances, specialized techniques, chemicals, and equipment that helped develop the insurance repair marketplace in the United Kingdom. Bill often flew across the pond to Northern Virginia in the late 1980s and 1990s to help Martin King prepare for CR Hell Week, as the Certified Restorer course was known in those days. In fact, he was at the class in such a role in 1988, the year that both Cliff Slotnick and Pete Consigli took their CR class. Bill was a close friend of pioneering restoration chemist Gene Madison of Madison Chemical Company, who was posthumously honored with the ML King Award in 1995. Bill became a great instructor, teaching restoration coursework throughout the United Kingdom. In the early 2000s, Bill anglicized ASCR's version of the Guidelines of Fire and Smoke Damage Repair, republished under the National Institute of Disaster Restoration brand, by editing the document to conform with localized language and the metric system. RIA published the guidelines as the United Kingdom edition. It could be said this was the genesis of the globalization of RIA. Bill and his wife Sue formed a close bond with the late Marty and Judy King, so it seems only appropriate that the sad news of his passing was formally announced to the RIA membership last night in Austin, Texas, at the annual Martin L. King Award ceremony that recognizes an individual for their contribution to the restoration industry. The ML King Award pays tribute to Marty's legacy and is RIA's most prestigious individual honor. Bill Lakin was the first and only RIA president to preside over the organization from his home abroad. In 2005, at RIA's annual fall conference in St. Louis, Martin King was the master of ceremonies at an association-sponsored roast of the Z-Man, which was orchestrated by Pete Consigli and friends. From the podium, Bill Lakin performed the hilarious roast segment that anyone who was in the room is not likely to forget, stripping down from a three-piece men's suit to a pink ballerina's costume. Bill's gregarious and self-effacing demeanor with his English dry sense of humor made it one of the highlights of the roast, which culminated to my great surprise when the entire immediate Slotnick family flew in to support me. In 2008, in Grapevine, Texas, Bill Lakin presented the ML King Award to Pete Consigli due to Marty's absence from the RIA convention that year. It was one of the few times I can remember that Pete was speechless. According to Rusty Amaranti, CR 2006 MLK Award recipient and 2008 president of RIA, no one could brighten a room with his passion more than Bill. My term as RIA president wouldn't have been as successful without it. We have lost a great brother of our industry. Pete and I will remember our illustrious colleague with fondness. May Bill rest in peace. On a happier note, it's my pleasure to congratulate Ernie Storer, Bales Restoration, DKI, as the recipient of the 2018 Martin King Award. Back to you, Joe.
IAQ Radio would like to thank our association sponsors. The Indoor Air Quality Association, a nonprofit multidisciplinary organization dedicated to promoting the exchange of indoor environmental information through education and research. Visit them at iaqa.org. Gray Wolf Sensing Solutions, who use advanced sensor software technology and embedded computers to provide superior environmental test instrumentation. Visit them, wolfsense.com. IAQ marquee sponsors are John Don Products, where restoration and abatement contractors shop. Visit them at jondon.com. That's jondon.com. Healthy Indoor Magazine, a free online digital magazine for industry professionals and consumers. Subscriptions are available at iaq.net. Particles Plus, engineers and manufacturers feature rich particle counters, air quality monitoring, instrumentation, and vacuum pump technology. ParticlesPlus.com. Count on us.
All right, we're back. Second half of our interview, we've got Dr. Ralph Moon and Mike Bowdoin. Gents, I want to start with Michael on this second half. Infrastructure. I want to talk a little bit about infrastructure, code, building code, zoning code, etc. Mike, there was a lot of publicity about the fact that the Houston area was kind of concreted over in many, at least according to the reports I've seen, and that may have added to the issue when you had all that 50 inches of rain and the rain had nowhere to go. Is there any discussion down there about changing the codes, or I mean, at this point, I don't think there is much in the way of code. Changing the zoning codes, maybe looking at better ways of making sure that when we build, things are able to drain?
Well, for either fortunately or unfortunately, depending how you look at it, there is no zoning in Houston, which has resulted in a lot of hardscaping over the years. What happened in Houston was not necessarily a natural event. The major parts of town that got flooded were flooded as a result of releases from controlled sources. The Barker Addicts Reservoir system was opened, and I don't know if you've ever seen a map of Houston, but Houston is transversed by bayous. Well, that's what we call them here in Texas. But when the water was released from the reservoirs, there was a massive downstream effect that literally put water into neighborhoods that had never seen it in 60, 70, 80 years. And again, up on the northeast side where I live in the Kingwood, Humble area next to Lake Houston, the Conroe Dam had collected a lot of water, and they released that, and it went down the San Jacinto River. So what has happened in Houston is kind of a perfect storm in the sense that there's been massive development, massive amounts of new hardscape. There's a lot of things they've been doing, especially in the San Jacinto River, mining sand and having dams at pinch points where the regulated flows differ at various points along the river. There's multiple jurisdictions that control floodwater in Houston. So I think what you're going to see is probably a lot less development, a lot less hardscape, and there may be a push for some sort of zoning regulation, but that's probably next to impossible. But what I do think will happen is there'll be some sort of combination of flood control jurisdictions to better manage the flow and better keep it under control. That's what I think you'll see in Houston.
Okay. And I'm curious, Ralph, with respect to back there, Ralph, what about in Florida? It seems like, I don't know, my impression is I haven't been, I've been to Florida a few times since the hurricanes, but I didn't get into the areas that were hit hard. And it just seems to me like the construction and the code and the changes that have been made over the years work pretty well. Would that be an accurate assessment?
I think that is right, spot on. We had a meeting last week just talking about hurricanes in anticipation of this broadcast. And I asked, what general trends have you seen? And they said that homes built before the 2000 era responded remarkably poorly in response to the wind as compared to those built afterwards. I mean, within communities, you could tell the era that the home was built because some were standing and some were not. So the Maria and Irma were wind-driven events, principally, except for the Keys, and of course in Houston. But they really showed off the benefit of improving the codes to make the structure stronger.
Interesting, Mike. And you don't foresee that? I mean, well, I guess Texas has building code as well. I don't know what year. The international code you guys are following right now, but is there any push to maybe adopt a more recent version of the international building code?
What I see as the probable outcome of Harvey is that they're going to be redrawing the flood maps. There's going to be some more enforcement of the building code, especially along waterways. If you're anywhere near a watershed, especially in Harris County, I think there'll be increased diligence with regard to new home construction. I do think some of the neighborhoods that got flooded will probably try to get levee systems in place to control the flow of water. I know there'll be a whole lot more dredging. One of the things we found out in Harvey was that the various authorities who were responsible for dredging our waterways had not done it in many, many years. So there was a clog up, and there was there was no place for the water to go but sideways. And so I do think there won't be. They may cause in certain areas cause the building elevation to go up, but I don't see anything drastic happening to the building code.
I wonder if either of you have seen. I saw an article. It was actually in Houston, Mike. There was I want to say it was a Starbucks, and it was built flood resistant, essentially. And the next day after the major flooding, after the waters had receded, it was open again without any problems. Do either of you anticipate more of a demand from people building homes or business owners building buildings that they're going to demand from the contractors that they use practices that are more resistant to flooding?
Well, what I see happening is I see that probably being implemented in more critical infrastructure areas like hospitals, schools, things like that. Well, because we've had some flooding in downtown Houston, especially the medical center before. And what they did came up with as a solution to that was floodgates and cutting off certain underground systems and things like that. So I think what you'll see is, I don't think you'll see the retail operators at the Starbucks level so much. I think what you're going to see is, especially along the bayous in Houston, the critical businesses and things like the hospitals and nursing homes, things like that. I think you'll see some sort of mitigation system in place. But as far as the run-of-the-mill Starbucks down the street, I don't see that happening.
Yeah, I agree with Mike. I think that the critical industries that see their investment in a piece of property for a period of decades, they'll be concerned about flooding and repositioning their facilities in safer zones. I think what's interesting question you raise is that of the homeowner who's moving to Florida or maybe moving to Houston, and they're looking to buy real estate. Will the realtor be open and descriptive of the risks posed by these previous events with regard to the location of this new home? Will developers be thinking the same thing? And will homeowners be astute enough to ask questions about groundwater table elevation, historic floods, and so forth? But I think that we would probably do them a service by having available maps that detail circumstances of flooding so they don't buy an asset that's at risk.
And just like you were saying before, Ralph, even just knowing that home was built after, say, 2000 versus a home built before 2000, much more likely you're going to have significant damage.
Absolutely. Another thing we noticed, it's kind of a peculiarity, is that in some of the newer homes where the first floor was concrete block, CMU, the second floor was wood frame, many times the architect will inset the second floor windows to make it look like concrete block. Mm. So aesthetically, it looks like they're both CMU, but they're not. The second floor is wood frame. Those structures, those windows leak. And although it may give some aesthetic appeal from the curb, from a functional point of view, they fail. And that would be something you'd want to reveal to a homeowner, saying, hey, it looks like a concrete block home, but it's not.
But it's not. And those second floor windows are inset, and they have in the past had issues. Interesting. All right, well, let's move on to the next topic. I want to know, let's talk a little more about restoration contractors and, some of the issues they've been dealing with as the result of these hurricanes. First, I want to know, what were the main problems you saw for contractors, and were they really any different from previous hurricanes? Was there any difference in how the response occurred with respect? I mean, things change all the time. Insurance is slightly different. Methods are a little bit different. Did you notice anything restoration contractors were dealing with or were doing that was different than in the past?
Not well. I think my response is that if I look back to the work done in 2005, 6, 7, when there was a flood of restoration contractors from other states coming into Florida and doing repairs, they did a lot of really questionable work. I mean, for instance, like putting another layer of drywall over a moldy wall, cover it up, and move on. That's just one example. I did not hear the same issues with this event because I think it was better regulated in terms of bringing in responsible or having a population of competent restorers in the state. I didn't hear any unusual things about drying that went on for months and weeks and months. So I thought that I just haven't heard anything that would distinguish this particular event from others, other than the fact that the introduction of outside vendors did not reveal a level of low competence that I heard 10 years ago.
In the past, okay. And I'm wondering how important was the IICRC's S500, the Professional Water Damage Restoration Standard, in the response to this event? It's been around a long time now. It's been revised pretty recently. It's back to ANSI, ANSI approved standard again, and I think there were some improvements in the most recent edition. How has that held up on the projects that you've seen?
I think it's done well, primarily because when I go to a deposition or to court, oftentimes the IICRC requirements and standards are the reference point. Now, many of the contractors who do the work are members of IICRC or have had training, and that is usually held up as the badge. I'm qualified. So I can't say that everyone has fulfilled all the obligations that are described in the guidelines, but nonetheless, I think that it's been a very important and valuable attribute to the restoration work.
Mike, you want to add anything to that? You were part of that, weren't you?
What I've heard from my restoration contractor clients is the biggest problem in Hurricane Harvey was logistical. Because of the widespread nature of the damage, their employees couldn't get down the street, much less to work. There was a shortage of drying equipment at first, which got sorted out pretty quickly, pretty early in the process. But it was just being able to move around town freely, because Houston is a very it's a very easy city when you consider there's multiple ways to get from point A to point B, but everybody drives in Houston. There's very, very little effective mass transit. So it was hard for many of the contractors to handle all the logistical problems because of the widespread damage. Other than that, their utilization and the effect of the standard, I think, was great. I didn't hear any issues with that, and I think that the S500 served itself well in this disaster.
And what about S520, Mike? That's coming up. I mean, you're going to see more people, having mold issues as time goes on. Texas has their own regulations on mold. Is there conflict there between the S520 and the Texas regulations, or do they work well together?
They work extremely well together. I've never heard any problems or any conflict between the state regulations and the 520. I think they work hand in glove, and really you're better practitioners, you're more professional, more well-tuned, educated remediation contractors have a great deal of respect for the 520. And the Texas Department of Health, actually the mold licensing has just been transferred from the Texas Department of Health, where it was for many years, to the Texas Department of Licensing and Registration. So I do think that there'll be some administrative changes done to the mold licensing in Texas, but I think they're going to be more form over substance.
I'm wondering, Ralph, when you do a lot of expert witness work, you look at the work that was done by contractors. You mentioned that you look at the S500 and that is a standard that is commonly followed. I wonder if you have any advice for contractors on areas of the S500 that maybe they're not following as closely as they should, or maybe not documenting as well as they should? Any tips you can give our contractors for that?
Well, certainly on the side of drying, documentation is really important. Not only just the fact you had so many dehumidifiers or fans, but you documented the moisture content in a reasonable manner during the course of the drying process. But my most recent case about a week and a half ago was interesting up in Georgia. And this is not an uncommon circumstance where a restoration contractor goes in after an event. It could be a storm or it could be a flood in the house. And they do their job, and 6 months later, they're called back to the table and say, hey, we got a problem. I got mold in my house. You're the last ones to touch it. You better come back and fix it. And that's a complicated evaluation to do, because it's true that there could have been some incomplete component that the restoration contractor may have done by not following completely with IICRC. But what I would encourage a restoration contractor to do when it takes on a job like that is formally document the conditions of the home before you begin. And why is that? Because you do a great job, you dry it out, you restore materials, and then the homeowner goes back to their old habits of not turning on the air conditioner, cooking spaghetti for 18 hours a day, taking long showers, and they humidify the home, reintroduce the moisture that caused mold and other microbial problems after you're done. So in this one case, I was able to go back in time and reformulate that there was a problem, but it pre-existed before their restoration effort. And I think that gave the insurance provider a better perspective, not to focus on the restorer, but rather upon the environment of the home and the people, and the photo documentation that were taken before the event that showed there was a problem then. So because I often find myself on both sides, for the restoration contractor, I'd say there are ways to help yourself by documenting conditions before you begin, so you can explain 6 and 8 months later why or why not you didn't contribute to the problem.
Interesting. Cliff, you want to follow up?
Yeah, I think with Ralph, I think one of the things that was unique in this particular situation is all of the contractors that Joe and I interviewed who were working during the event had long lists of clients and waiting lists, and actually had to turn people away. And I think one of the things that was different in this particular situation, and the primary reason that there wasn't over drying, was that those contractors needed to get that equipment out as soon as possible and get it on another project.
Good point.
So I think that probably a fair amount of that was going on.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, let's go to the roundup, gentlemen.
Move 'em on, hit 'em up, move 'em on, hit 'em up, rawhide. Cut 'em out, ride 'em in, let 'em out, cut 'em out, ride 'em in, rawhide.
Question here. I'm going to put one question out, and then I think we're going to see if Pete Consigli, the restoration industry's global watchdog, can join us. I'm not sure if he's still on the line or not, but gents, I want to throw one out. Let's talk a little bit about the legal landscape following these events. Any recommendations, or have any of your recommendations changed with respect to potential legal liabilities, and or do you see any unusual lawsuits maybe coming out of these disasters? Start with Mike.
Absolutely. What happened in Houston was a very unique situation, and I think there's adequate or really overwhelming evidence to support this claim that most of the flooding done in Houston was man-made, either through lack of maintenance of the watershed systems or the premature, uncontrolled release from either the Addicks-Barker Reservoir or Lake Conroe. When you have things like that happen, one of the things you have to realize from a legal perspective is those acts are done by entities that can claim sovereign immunity. So you really can't sue them. But what you can do is you can try to recover damages for their taking of your property without compensation. And the way that's handled primarily is through inverse condemnation lawsuits. So one of the things that the legal community in Houston especially is championing, is trying to push right now, is these inverse condemnation lawsuits against these regulatory authorities. So when you look at it's a very unique legal landscape, and this is the first time I think it's happened where so much of the flooding has been caused by some of the premature release from a number of these watersheds where since we were somewhat, there was time left in the hurricane season when this happened. There were a lot of authorities that released water to make room for additional flood water from the next hurricane. Well, the problem was there was no new hurricane. There was no additional flooding event. So what you had was you created additional damage based upon an action taken to prevent speculative damage in the future, the additional rainfall. So I think that there's going to be a very unique area of law, and I think things are going to change when this is all said and done.
Interesting. Ralph, anything you'd like to add on that topic?
Well, first of all, I'm not an attorney, so I don't want to give the impression that I'm giving any legal advice. But as far as themes in types of claims, I don't really see a big difference. I think that most plaintiff attorneys are looking at policy language to find an opportunity where they can take a portion of the policy promises and try to assign it to an event that occurred in the home, a sudden accidental event, if possible, associated with the storm. And then by leveraging that area, they file a lawsuit by the hundreds and then try to get some type of a agreement about the homeowner and the damages that they can benefit from. But that theme is played over and over and over again. So I don't see a big distinction in terms of the hurricane or any other claim, with the exception of volume. And so I know that insurance companies are being overwhelmed with hundreds of insurance claims and lawsuits. And so I see the same thing played over and over again in daily claims or in hurricane claims.
Interesting. Okay. Cliff, anything you'd like to add before we wrap it up here?
No, I'm good, Pete. Or Joe. I'm sorry.
Let's see if we got Pete Consigli on maybe for a final thought. Pete? Oh, we got to unmute you. Hang in there. Pete, we have you on the line, buddy?
Yeah. Can you hear me okay, guys?
Yeah, you're great. Hear you, Pete.
Yeah. Hey, great show. First of all, I want to thank Cliff for that wonderful eulogy at halftime of Billy Lakin. We really miss him. Congratulations to Ernie Storer. That's great. The one little comment I'll say, and then I got a couple of comments from the show for the wrap. CNR Magazine, Cliff and myself helped coordinate a bunch of the eulogy, which will be posted on, well, obviously it'll be on the blog, part of the blog, but it'll be posted on the CNR Hub, Content Hub on the RA website later this afternoon, but also the write-up on all of the awards last night in Austin, write-up on Ernie, and the 2 Phoenix Award winners, and also the Golden Quill Award winners. So anyone would be interested in that, they may want to go check it out on the website. So I got 2 things. I think that early on you guys were talking a little bit about the public adjusters, and it's kind of like anything, just with saying the contractors, lawyers, the whole 9 yards. You have the kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I remember the show that we had a couple of years ago with Paul Hanahan from the Fair, who was one of the founding guys of the Florida Public Adjusters. But I think it's important to remind the listeners, consultants, contractors, even any general public that is a fan of the show, to go to those websites of the reputable associations for the adjusters to really look. They have codes of ethics, things that are similar to a lot of the contractor codes. I think it's important to mention that. The other thing that I've been hearing through the grapevine and through my peeps, if you would, is, well, 2 things. Number one, that question that you asked, Joe, just after the roundup, before you brought, had Mike and Ralph comment. If I had a guess of the listeners who sent it in, it probably was the type of question that Mr. Lapatere would send in. I know he couldn't call in for the whole show, but about halftime he was able to call in. That's a question right up his alley, because I remember in talking to John and a lot of the work that he's doing as an assessor throughout the state of Florida, his gut tells him that there could be more lawsuits that can come out of this whole Irma thing than there were from Sandy and a lot of these other hurricanes. So I guess time will kind of tell in Florida, because there's a lot going on, that I think is real close to the edge in both the assessment area and in the remediation area with the licensing around mold and all that. The other thing too, and I don't know, if Michael's heard this, but I will tell you another thing that I've heard, is I heard that there's going to be things that are possibly going to affect our industry that are going to filter up to the Attorney General's offices in Texas. Any of you that remember when Harvey first hit, the Attorney General came on the air while the hurricane was still going, warning people against ripping off the citizen. Pam Bondi, the Attorney General for Florida, she kind of also filled in, and unfortunately, she was been on the news shows the last couple of days because of the tragedy that we had in Florida. But I think in Texas in particular, I think potentially there are going to be some prominent people in this industry that could be sucked up into things that could be bad press because of potential price gouging and unethical activities and things of this nature. It's something that really pains my heart, but these are things that happen, and I think it's up to the industry to self-regulate itself before the government comes down with a heavy hand. And that was exactly what Paul Hanahan said, Cliff, if you remember, in the blog and on the show when you pressed him. He said that's how the public adjusters in Florida straightened things out after Katrina and after the 40 year in 2004, because it was so radical that they were afraid the government would come down, and they had to straighten that out. And they probably, I think, done as good a job as they can, but oftentimes these things backslide, and I think this is kind of a plague to the industry. So, for whatever it's worth, guys, Joe and Cliff, I want to really thank you with all this coverage that you guys have done for this season, allowing me to help you set some of these shows up. I think they've been fantastic. Joe, I think it was great the other day on the email that you sent out that you listed links for all the shows to kind of culminate it with, we couldn't have had two better guys to culminate the show. Mr. Bad Moon Rising, and of course, that good old friend, Texas Rattlesnake, legal of mine from H-Town, or as they say in Texas, who's stoned, because I think you guys really, honestly, really give a real practical, honest, a very good viewpoint. I think it'll be very useful, and I think the talking points that Cliff puts in the blog will be really good for a lot of the readers and people that'll call in and will download that information. So look, I really thank you guys really for all of this. I think it's really been good, and here we are in 2018, and we'll move on to the next thing, whatever it is. And anyway, thanks a lot to everyone, guys. I'll turn it back over to you, Joe and Cliff.
Thank you for your help. It's always been a pleasure working with you, and I can't think of a better way to end the show than the way you just did. We will also be watching out for any follow-up, good tips you gave us there on things to watch for with respect to the gouging, and the Attorney Generals will be keeping an eye on that for listeners. But, hey, we're going to thank, first of all, Bad Moon Rising, Dr. Ralph Moon. Thank you, Ralph. Attorney Michael Bowdoin. Thank you, Mike, for joining us. I know you've been busy this
Yes, sir.
My co-host, the Z-Man, Pete Consigli, the Restoration Industry Global Watchdog. Thank you. At the controls, John, you got to have faith. Our second full show on IAQ Radio Plus here, and I think it's gone pretty well. We've had good feedback from folks. We'll be back next Friday. We've got part 2 with Sal LaDuca, Electricity, Electromagnetic Fields, and Indoor Environmental Quality. A very interesting show. We had part 1 with Sal, and looking forward to finishing up part 2. Was supposed to be last week, but I was under the weather. I'm back, and we're back with IAQ Radio. We'll see you next Friday at noon for the next episode of IAQ Radio Plus.
For IAQ Radio, I'm Spike Reed saying thanks for listening.